A man lay broken in the snow, bleeding, sure the world would forget him, until a German shepherd lunged between him and death. The man was seconds from death when a German shepherd threw himself into the path of the bullet. That one act of loyalty would unravel 15 years of corruption, betrayal, and buried secrets. But the man wasn't just any stranger. He was someone who had once carried the badge, someone who had already lost everything he loved. What followed wasn't just survival. It was a miracle that turned grief into justice, and a loyal dog into a legend. As the gunfire echoed through the frozen valley, one question remained. If a miracle like this happened not in Cedar Springs, but in your city, would you believe it? Or would you turn away? The winter fog clung to the pines like a shroud, muffling every sound except the crunch of snow beneath boots. John Miller exhaled slowly, watching the vapor curl away from his lips in ghostly spirals. At 58, the former detective carried his years like an ill-fitting coat, broad-shouldered, tall but worn down by time and grief. His once black hair was streaked with gray, combed back without care, and the hard lines of his jaw had grown sharper since solitude replaced companionship. He wore a thick flannel shirt beneath a heavy brown coat, the fabric worn smooth at the elbows, and boots scuffed from 1,000 morning walks around the perimeter of his property. The years had not dulled his eyes. They were still steel blue, sharp and restless, always scanning, always questioning eyes that had seen too much and yet refused to forget. Beside him bounded Max, his 8-year-old German shepherd, fur a proud mixture of sable and black, with a muscular frame and alert posture. Max's amber eyes were striking, piercing, intelligent, as though he understood more than a dog should. His thick winter coat bristled against the cold, and his gait was smooth, powerful, honed from years of running through these woods. Max wasn't just a companion. He was John's only family now, the anchor that kept him from drifting into despair. The dog had been a gift. No, a final request from Emily, John's daughter, whispered from her hospital bed. "Get a dog, Daddy." Dogs don't leave you. Usually Max's routine was predictable. He sniffed the undergrowth, marked a few spots, occasionally barked at distant deer. But this morning was different. His hackles rose suddenly as he halted before the ancient oak that marked the edge of John's 10-acre land. The tree stood like a sentinel, its gnarled trunk twisted by age, its bark scarred by lightning long past. For years, John had passed it without a second thought. Now Max circled the base, his bark sharp and urgent, a sound that carried raw fear instead of the usual commanding tone. John froze, the hairs at the back of his neck prickling. Max had faced down bears without retreating, had stared into the dark eyes of strangers with unshakable calm, had endured storms that rattled the cabin walls, yet now he whined and backed away from this oak as if it concealed something monstrous. John's instincts, sharpened by 3 decades of chasing criminals and unraveling lies, flared alive. He tightened his grip on the thermos of black coffee he carried, the warmth suddenly inadequate against the chill crawling up his spine. He stepped closer to the tree, his boots sinking into frozen soil, eyes narrowing as he spotted an irregular swelling along the trunk. The oak's bark bulged outward in a grotesque knot about 6 feet above the ground, the size of a grown man curled within. Thin fissures split its surface, and from them seeped a dark, sticky sap that glistened against the frost. John leaned in, the smell hitting him before his eyes fully adjusted. It was wrong organic, foul, reminiscent not of pine resin, but of decay, of something that belonged in a morgue rather than a forest. His stomach tightened. He reached instinctively for the folding knife clipped inside his coat pocket, the same blade he'd carried since his first day as a patrolman 35 years ago. "Easy, boy," he muttered to Max, though his own heart thudded hard enough to drown the words. The German shepherd whined again, retreating a few paces, tail low, ears flat. The sight unsettled John more than the tree itself. Max never retreated. The dog's terror was proof enough that whatever lurked inside the oak was no ordinary secret. He raised the knife, intending to press it against the bulge in the bark, when the growl of tires on gravel pierced the silence. John spun, knife still in hand, as a dark patrol car emerged slowly through the fog on the dirt road leading to his cabin. Its headlights cut through the mist, twin beams searching, accusing. His pulse quickened. Few people visited his property, fewer still without warning. The car rolled to a stop, engine purring low, and for a moment the woods were silent again, save for Max's unsettled panting. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Deputy Lauren Mitchell. John knew her well enough, at least. He thought he did. She was in her late 30s, tall and fit, with auburn hair usually tied back in a neat ponytail. Her uniform clung to a frame honed by years of field work, the badge on her chest catching the faint morning light. Her face, usually open and framed by soft hazel eyes, now carried something harder. She was attractive in the way of someone who had little patience for appearances. Sharp cheekbones, pale skin touched by the cold, lips pressed into a line that gave nothing away. In the past, Lauren had visited occasionally to check on him, bringing updates from town or sharing coffee on his porch. She had always treated him with the deference due to a veteran detective, but also with a quiet warmth that had almost coaxed John out of his shell. He had allowed himself to think she was different from the others in Cedar Springs, respectful, maybe even trustworthy. But today her gaze was cool, measured, as if she were reading a suspect rather than greeting a neighbor. "Morning, John," she called, her voice steady, almost too steady. John slid the knife back into his coat pocket, wary of how it might look. "Morning," he replied, masking his unease with practiced calm. Lauren's eyes flicked to Max, still bristling near the oak, then back to John. "Everything all right out here?" "We got a call about a disturbance. Neighbor thought they heard." "Gunshots," John almost laughed, but the humor died in his throat. There were no neighbors within 3 miles of his cabin. Whoever had made that call, it wasn't someone local, and Lauren knew it. "No gunshots," he said flatly. "Just me and Max. You know how sound carries in these woods?" She nodded, though her eyes lingered on the oak, on the disturbed soil at its base. Her right hand rested casually, too casually, on her duty belt, fingers near the holster. Max growled low in his throat, his amber gaze locked on her every movement. John studied her in silence, instincts kicking in the way they had in interrogation rooms years ago. Something about her presence felt off, rehearsed. He thought of the bulge in the oak, of the dark sap seeping like blood, and of Max's uncharacteristic fear. His gut whispered what his mind refused to say aloud. Someone knew about the tree, and maybe Lauren wasn't here by chance. The fog thickened, pressing close, muting the world into a cocoon of suspicion. John's heart beat faster, not just from what he had seen in the oak, but from the realization forming in his mind. For 15 years, he had buried questions about his old partner Daniel Brooks's disappearance, convincing himself the wilderness had claimed him. But as Max whimpered and Deputy Mitchell's hazel eyes swept the scene with too much calculation, John felt the past stirring, clawing its way back to the surface like roots breaking through frozen ground. Max barked once, sharp and urgent, as if confirming his master's unspoken fear. Lauren took a step closer, her boots crunching the frost, her gaze locking onto John's face. "Mind if I take a look around?" she asked, her tone polite but her eyes drilling into him, searching for cracks. John hesitated, the weight of his knife heavy in his pocket, the phantom scent of decay still curling in his nostrils. His pulse hammered with the old rhythm of interrogation, of danger circling unseen. Max positioned himself between them, growling low, protective yet trembling. The oak loomed behind him, its bulge pulsing like a hidden heart. The deputy stood before him, steady, inscrutable. And John Miller, for the first time in years, felt the cold hand of dread tightening around his throat. Something was terribly wrong, and the morning mist was no longer just weather. It was a veil hiding truths that were about to claw their way into the open. John Miller felt the cold seep into his bones as he stood before the ancient oak. Max's growl vibrated through the mist, low and guttural, a warning that rattled John more than the strange bulge on the trunk itself. The dog's amber eyes were wide, ears flat against his head, tail stiff, a stance of fear John had never seen in 8 long years of companionship. Snowflakes drifted lazily around them, settling on Max's dark coat. But he didn't shake them off. He was too focused on the tree. John's hand tightened on the worn handle of his folding knife, the steel blade glinting faintly in the gray morning light. His breath steamed before him as he raised the knife and pressed it against the bark. The oak's surface was damp and unyielding, yet when he dragged the blade downward, the bark split with a wet sound, like tearing fabric. A sharp odor burst forth, a fetid mix of mold and something worse, something disturbingly organic. He gagged but steadied his hands. Inside the fissure, fibers of rotting cloth clung to the damp interior. He dug deeper, pulling free a fragment of fabric, blackened with age and moisture. Beneath it, a metallic glimmer flashed. He scraped away more bark until the shape became undeniable. It was a badge. A police badge. John staggered back, his heart slamming against his ribs. His mind raced. This wasn't just decay, wasn't just nature's trick. Someone had been placed here, sealed away in the living wood. The badge still bore the faint outline of numbers, though grime obscured most. Memories crashed over him, cases gone cold, rumors that had haunted his department, and above all, the unresolved disappearance of his partner Daniel Brooks. Max barked sharply, as if to jar him from his spiraling thoughts. The bark wasn't warning now. It was desperate, anxious. John turned to calm him, only to freeze at the sound of approaching footsteps crunching over frost. Deputy Lauren Mitchell emerged from the fog, her auburn hair pulled back tight, her face pale but composed. Her hazel eyes flicked between John, the knife in his hand, and the raw wound on the tree's trunk. She stopped a few feet away, hand resting near her holster, posture deceptively casual but ready. "What are you doing, John?" she asked evenly, though her tone carried more suspicion than curiosity. John swallowed hard. He could feel sweat prick beneath his collar despite the winter chill. "Just checking the tree. It didn't look right." His voice sounded weak even to his own ears. Lauren's gaze dropped to the badge peeking through the splintered bark. Her pupils contracted. "That's a police badge, isn't it?" Before John could answer, Max stepped forward, teeth bared, growling louder. The dog planted himself squarely between John and Lauren, every muscle taut. It wasn't the usual protective stance of loyalty, it was distrust, an instinctual recognition that this woman, who had once shared coffee on John's porch, might be a threat. Lauren shifted her weight subtly, adjusting her stance as if preparing for a confrontation. John noticed the way her hand lingered near her sidearm, the slight narrowing of her eyes. The detective in him cataloged these details automatically, even as dread curdled in his gut. "Where did you get that?" she pressed, nodding toward the badge. John hesitated. If he told her the truth that the oak itself had concealed it, he risked becoming the prime suspect in whatever this was. But withholding information would only feed her suspicions. His mind raced. He saw flashes of his wife Mary's gentle smile, his daughter Emily's last words, Daniel Brooks laughing across a cluttered desk 15 years ago. Trust had cost him everything. Trust could kill him now. "The tree," he said finally, voice rough. "It was inside." Lauren tilted her head slightly, studying him. Her expression betrayed nothing, but John felt the weight of her judgment pressing down. "That doesn't make sense," she said, almost to herself. "Why would a badge be in a tree?" John wanted to say what he was thinking, that it wasn't just a badge inside, but likely a body. But he stopped himself. Saying it aloud would make it real, and once spoken, there would be no turning back. Max barked again, snapping John out of his spiral. The sound echoed through the woods, startling a flock of ravens from the nearby branches. They scattered into the mist, black shapes vanishing into white. Lauren stepped closer. "I'm going to have to report this," she said carefully. "You know that, don't you?" Her words twisted in John's stomach. She hadn't even examined the tree properly, hadn't asked for evidence, yet her first instinct was to report him. The realization cut deep. In her eyes, he wasn't a retired detective anymore. He was a suspect. John opened his mouth to reply, but the sound of another engine rumbled faintly in the distance. Tires on gravel, steady and deliberate, growing closer. Both he and Lauren turned toward the sound. Max snarled, ears pricked toward the road. Through the fog, the outline of a second vehicle emerged, another patrol car, darker, older, creeping along the dirt road that led to John's cabin. John's chest tightened. This wasn't routine. This wasn't coincidence. Lauren's hand shifted on her belt, her eyes flicking quickly to John before darting back to the approaching vehicle. For the first time, her calm facade cracked. He caught it, a flicker of unease, almost fear. "Stay here," she ordered curtly, though her voice trembled on the last word. Max barked furiously, planting his body even more firmly between John and the deputy. His growls rumbled like distant thunder, warning of the storm about to break. The second patrol car slowed, headlights cutting through the fog, illuminating the oak's wounded trunk and the glinting badge within. John's breath caught in his throat. Whoever was inside that car already knew. The headlights of the second patrol car cut through the fog, casting pale beams across the oak tree's twisted trunk and the faint metallic glint of the badge half buried within. John Miller's breath caught. His fingers curled around the knife in his coat pocket, though he knew steel wouldn't stop the tide of unease creeping in. Beside him, Max growled so deeply that the sound seemed to vibrate through the frozen ground. John's mind fought to focus. He had always been methodical. 30 years as a detective had taught him to read scenes, to catalog details, to weigh risk against instinct. But this moment wasn't a crime scene. It was a memory clawing out of the past. 15 years ago, Detective Daniel Brooks had vanished without a trace. Daniel had been more than a colleague. He was John's closest friend, the man who made long stakeouts bearable with a sardonic joke, the partner who caught his blind spots both on the job and in life. Daniel was ruggedly built, 6 feet tall, with dark hair perpetually uncombed and a beard that he trimmed just enough to avoid reprimand. He had a crooked smile that carried mischief, but his hazel eyes revealed something more: an iron will, a refusal to bend to corruption or easy answers. Where John was cautious, Daniel was bold. Where John tempered his words, Daniel spoke with blunt conviction. That conviction had earned him enemies inside Cedar Springs' department, though Daniel had never cared. John could still see him clearly, leaning against the hood of his car, coffee in hand, talking about his wife, his 2 boys, about the cases he refused to let die. Then, one winter day, Daniel went out on what should have been a routine follow-up and never came back. The department searched, the FBI combed the woods, but no trace was found. Over time, the theories shifted: accident, voluntary disappearance, foul play. The official line was that Daniel got lost in the wilderness. John had never believed it. And now, staring at badge number 312 glinting from within the oak, he knew his doubts had been justified. The patrol car's engine cut off. The driver's door opened with a slow, deliberate creak. Sheriff Robert Hale stepped out, his broad frame emerging from the fog like a predator from its den. Hale was in his late 50s, though his hair steel gray and cropped close gave him the appearance of a man older than his years. He carried his bulk with authority, shoulders squared, chest heavy under the sheriff's jacket, boots polished even for rural roads. His face was carved with deep lines, not of laughter, but of command, of decisions made without room for softness. His jaw was square, lips thin, nose slightly crooked from an old break. His pale blue eyes were what unsettled John most: cold, assessing, the eyes of someone who weighed people not by character, but by usefulness. "Hale," John said cautiously, his voice low. The sheriff's gaze drifted from John to the tree, then to the German shepherd bristling at John's side. Max's growls deepened, teeth flashing white in the glow of headlights. "Morning, Miller," Hale replied, his voice steady, gravelly from years of barking orders. "Foggy day for digging around trees, isn't it?" John stiffened. He hadn't told anyone about the oak, hadn't called for backup. Hale's presence wasn't coincidence. Lauren Mitchell shifted uneasily, glancing at her superior. "Sheriff, he cut into the oak. There's a badge inside." Hale's eyes flickered briefly at the wound in the bark. "Is that so?" he murmured, almost too calmly. John felt the weight of history pressing on him. Hale had been his superior when Daniel vanished, a man who offered sympathy and reassurances while insisting the department had done all it could. John remembered how Hale had told him to let it go, that chasing ghosts would only burn him out. At the time, grief-stricken, John had accepted it. Now, looking into those pale blue eyes, he wondered if Hale's words had been meant not to console, but to silence. "What exactly are you suggesting, Miller?" Hale asked, his tone deceptively mild. "I'm not suggesting anything," John replied carefully. "But you know damn well whose badge that is." Hale stepped closer, his boots crunching on the frozen ground, the scent of his cologne sharp woodsy cut through the rot emanating from the tree. He loomed over John, his breath steady, his expression unreadable. Lauren hovered at his side, her face tight with uncertainty. John noticed the twitch in her jaw, the way her eyes darted between him and the sheriff. She looked like someone caught between duty and fear, as though she knew more than she could admit. Max's growl crescendoed, pulling John's focus back to the present. The dog's instincts had never failed him. "You've been out here too long, Miller," Hale said softly, almost kindly. "Alone with your ghosts, your grief. Sometimes the mind plays tricks when it's starved for the company." John's fists clenched. "Don't patronize me, Hale." That badge doesn't lie. Hale's gaze hardened. For a fleeting second, the mask slipped, and John saw something cold flicker in the sheriff's eyes, something that confirmed what his gut had whispered for years. But before John could press, a new sound cut through the mist, the faint crunch of footsteps not belonging to any of them. They came from the tree line, deliberate, slow. Max's ears shot forward, his entire body tense, hackles raised. John pivoted, knife ready, eyes straining against the fog. A figure emerged, a man carrying a camera slung over his shoulder, his breath steaming in the air. It was Michael Carter, a freelance journalist who occasionally drifted through Cedar Springs chasing rumors of corruption. John had seen him once or twice at the diner in town, early 30s, medium build, with tousled brown hair and a stubbled jaw that gave him a restless look. His eyes, green and sharp, always seemed to be searching for angles, stories hidden in shadows. He wore a worn leather jacket over flannel, jeans scuffed at the knees, and heavy boots crusted with road salt. His manner carried both curiosity and suspicion, the air of someone convinced that every silence concealed a crime. "Well, well," Carter said, raising the camera slightly. "I was starting to think the rumors were just smoke. But look at this, our retired detective, the sheriff, the deputy, all gathered around a tree bleeding secrets." Hale's face darkened. "You don't belong here, Carter." Michael smiled thinly. "Funny. That's what people usually tell me right before I find out they're hiding something." John's pulse quickened. This wasn't good. Carter's presence meant more eyes, more questions, and more fuel for suspicion. If Carter framed this wrong, John could go from witness to suspect in a heartbeat. "Get out of here," Hale growled, stepping toward him. But Carter didn't move. His green eyes locked on John, gleaming with a mixture of intrigue and accusation. "What did you find, Miller?" "Whose badge is that? Or maybe I should ask, what were you doing out here with a knife before anyone else arrived?" John opened his mouth to answer, but Hale cut him off sharply. "Enough. This is an active investigation." The sheriff's words rang hollow. There had been no call, no official dispatch, no procedure. Hale wasn't investigating. He was controlling. Max barked furiously, lunging a step forward. The tension snapped taut, every thread ready to tear. And then, without warning, the oak groaned. The sound was deep, unnatural, like the tree itself was alive and resisting intrusion. A fissure widened across the bulge, splitting the bark further. Something pale pushed against the opening from within. The fog seemed to thicken, swallowing the moment in silence, broken only by Max's frantic barking. John's heart hammered. The badge had been only the beginning. Whatever was inside the oak was forcing its way out. The oak groaned again, its bark splitting with a sound that made John Miller's stomach twist. Max's barking grew frantic, his body rigid, claws digging into the frost, as if he could anchor the world before it collapsed. The German shepherd's breath came in hot bursts of steam, his amber eyes darting between the fissure in the tree and the figures standing around it. John's instincts screamed danger, not only from what was inside the oak, but from the people watching him. Deputy Lauren Mitchell's voice cut through the mist. "John, step back. Let us handle this." Her tone carried the clipped authority of law enforcement, yet it rang hollow. Her hazel eyes, once open and almost kind during their porch conversations, now gleamed with something closer to calculation. She stood tall, auburn hair tied tight, one hand hovering near her belt. The other rested on her hip with an almost staged casualness, like she wanted to appear calm while bracing for confrontation. Max snarled, teeth bared, the sound raw and animal. John felt his heart pound, in rhythm with the growls. If Max didn't trust her, why should he? Then Sheriff Robert Hale moved closer, his heavy boots crunching the frozen soil. He was an imposing figure, broad-shouldered, the cold mist clinging to his steel-gray hair. His pale blue eyes surveyed the scene with the precision of a chess master, calculating every angle. He placed his hand casually across his radio, thumb covering the transmit button, a movement so slight that few would notice. John did. After 30 years of reading people, he knew that gesture was deliberate, an effort to keep something hidden. "You're rattled, Miller," Hale said evenly, his voice gravelly but measured. "Let's not make this worse than it needs to be." He shifted slightly, positioning himself so that the narrow path leading back to John's cabin was blocked by his bulk. To anyone else, it might have looked like coincidence. To John, it was a red flag. His breath grew shallow. Something about Hale's presence reeked of control, of silencing. He thought of Daniel Brooks, his friend, his partner, whose badge now glinted from the oak's wound. For 15 years, Hale had insisted Daniel must have gotten lost in the woods. John had tried to believe him. Now the sheriff's calm demeanor felt like a mask stretched too tightly across a darker truth. John tightened his grip on the knife in his pocket, not to use it, but to remind himself that he wasn't defenseless. His voice, however, betrayed nothing. "Funny," he said slowly. "The last time you told me to let something go, Hale, a man disappeared." The sheriff's pale eyes flicked with a warning glint. "Careful." Before John could respond, the crack of a camera shutter split the air. Everyone turned sharply toward the sound. Out of the mist emerged Michael Carter, camera strap slung over his shoulder, his face half lit by the beams of the patrol cars. Michael was in his early 30s, medium build, his leather jacket worn at the seams and jeans coated with dust. His green eyes glittered with restless energy, the eyes of a man who lived on caffeine, deadlines, and suspicion. His brown hair fell untidily across his forehead, and his jaw was shadowed with stubble that suggested more nights chasing leads than sleeping. John recognized him. He'd seen Carter around town, notebook in hand, always pressing locals for whispers of corruption. "Well, this is interesting," Michael said, raising his camera again. The old detective, the sheriff, the deputy, all standing around a bleeding oak. Looks like a headline waiting to happen. Hale's jaw tightened. "Carter, this isn't your business." Michael smiled thinly. "Missing persons? Cover-ups? Corruption? That's exactly my business." He lifted the camera and snapped another photo, the flash momentarily illuminating Hale's scowl. Lauren shifted uneasily, her hazel eyes darting between Carter and John. Her hand moved closer to her holster. Max growled louder, pushing himself between John and the others, as if he sensed every thread of tension snapping tighter. Carter turned his gaze on John. "What did you find here, Miller? And why does it look like you were cutting into that tree before anyone else showed up?" His voice carried accusation, but beneath it was something else curiosity sharpened into suspicion. John opened his mouth, but Hale cut him off with a low growl of words. "Enough! This isn't a circus. Carter, put that camera away before I confiscate it." The journalist raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? Interfering with justice or interfering with whatever it is you're trying to bury? John's pulse quickened. He could see where this was going. Hale wanted control. Carter wanted exposure. And caught in the middle, he and Max looked like suspects rather than witnesses. Listen, John said, forcing his voice calm. There's a badge in that tree. Badge number 312. Daniel Brooks's badge. For the first time, Carter's confident smirk faltered. Daniel Brooks? The detective who vanished? His green eyes flicked with recognition, then widened. Are you telling me? The oak split again with a sickening crack. A piece of bark fell away, revealing something pale, pressed tight against the interior. The mist swirled as if recoiling from it. Max lunged forward, barking wildly, then retreated with a whine, hackles stiff. Carter lowered his camera, his face pale. Lauren's lips parted slightly, her composure cracking. Hale's expression, however, remained stone cold, though his eyes narrowed as if calculating how much had just slipped beyond his control. John stared at the fissure. Through it, the unmistakable outline of fabric and bone began to emerge. The badge had been the first sign. Now the oak was giving up more than metal. Carter lifted the camera again, hand trembling. Jesus, he whispered, voice almost reverent. There's a body in there. Hale's voice snapped like a whip. Stop recording. Carter ignored him, snapping another picture. The flash lit the horror inside the oak for a fraction of a second, enough to confirm what John already knew. 15 years ago, his friend Daniel Brooks hadn't gotten lost. He had been buried alive by time and bark. The silence after the flash was suffocating. The mist pressed in, cold and heavy. Hale took a slow step toward Carter, his broad frame casting a shadow that swallowed the journalist whole. Max growled so fiercely that his body shook, placing himself once again between John and danger. And in that frozen instant, John realized something with chilling clarity. Hale hadn't come here to investigate. He'd come to make sure the truth never left these woods. The sheriff's hand moved toward his belt, and the mist seemed to close tighter around them all. The oak tree had given up more than bark. As John Miller pried deeper into the fissure with trembling hands, Max stood close, his heavy body trembling with restless energy. The German shepherd's breath came in white bursts of steam, every muscle taut, his amber eyes flicking between the mist and his master's movements. When John's knife scraped against metal again, his pulse surged. He reached inside, fingertips brushing something cold. It wasn't just the badge. He pulled free a revolver, its barrel rusted and grip decayed from years sealed in damp wood. His breath caught at the sight. He knew it. Daniel Brooks had carried a Smith & Wesson .38, the same model now resting in John's gloved hands. The weapon's chamber still held rounds, corroded but intact. Then his fingers found something else. A notebook. Its leather cover was swollen with moisture. The pages stuck together at the edges. He pried it open just enough to see Daniel's familiar, compact handwriting before closing it again to protect what remained. A shiver ran through him. Daniel's last words, his last thoughts, might be written here. Evidence. Proof. Max barked suddenly, snapping him back to the present. From the fog beyond the tree line came the click of a camera lens. Michael Carter stood there, his breath clouding in the cold, green eyes gleaming with hunger. The journalist adjusted his camera strap, stubble catching the pale light. "Now that," Carter said, voice carrying easily through the stillness, "is one hell of a discovery." John stiffened. This isn't a story, Carter. It's evidence. The journalist's lips curved in a faint smile. Evidence has many uses. Depends who's holding it. He raised his camera, snapping another shot as the flash lit John's face, the gun, the notebook in his hands. Max snarled, lunging a step forward, forcing Carter to step back with a muttered curse. But his expression didn't falter, only sharpened. Later that day, the damage was already done. By the time John returned to his cabin with Max at his side, the quiet of Cedar Springs was gone. Word spread like wildfire through the town. John Miller had been found digging up evidence tied to his partner's disappearance. The whispers twisted faster than truth. Some claimed John had hidden Daniel's body himself. Others that guilt had finally driven him to unearth his crime. At the diner, locals leaned in over steaming mugs of coffee, muttering about the old detective who couldn't let the past die. By evening, Carter's online article hit every local feed. Retired detective found with missing partner's badge and gun, investigation or cover-up. It was written in cautious tones, couched in questions rather than accusations, but the insinuation was clear. John Miller looked guilty. Inside the cabin, John sat at his scarred wooden table, the revolver wrapped in a cloth, the notebook sealed in a plastic bag he'd found in his supplies. Max paced the room restlessly, nails clicking against the floorboards, pausing only to press his head against John's leg. The dog's warmth was the only comfort in the icy tide of suspicion rising outside. A knock at the door broke the silence. 3 sharp raps. Max barked ferociously, throwing his weight against the door as if to keep it shut. John rose cautiously, gun not in hand but within reach, and pulled the door open. Deputy Lauren Mitchell stood on the porch, snowflakes clinging to her auburn hair, uniform crisp beneath her heavy jacket. But the softness John had once glimpsed in her hazel eyes was gone. They were cold now, measured. "Evening, John," she said, voice flat. He didn't invite her in. "You heard the rumors already, I take it." Her lips tightened. "It's not just rumors. Carter's piece has half the town convinced you've been hiding something for years." Sheriff Hale isn't happy. John studied her, searching for cracks. The faintest twitch in her jaw. The way she kept her hands visible at her sides told him she was treading carefully. "And what do you believe?" he asked. Mitchell's eyes flicked briefly to Max, still growling low at her presence, then back to John. "Doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is how this looks. And right now, it doesn't look good for you." John's grip tightened on the doorframe. "You think I killed my best friend and stuffed him in a tree?" Mitchell didn't flinch. "I think people want answers, and someone's going to take the fall." She paused, lowering her voice. "You've made enemies in this department, John. Old enemies. Maybe you should let this go before it buries you too." The words hit him like a blade. Let it go. The same phrase Hale had used years ago. His gut clenched. Mitchell wasn't just worried, she was warning him. Max shoved his nose against John's hand, whining softly, as if urging him not to trust the woman at the door. "I'm not walking away," John said firmly. Mitchell's gaze lingered a beat too long. Then she stepped back. "Then watch your back." She turned and walked into the mist, her figure fading until only her footprints remained in the snow. John shut the door, chest heavy. He turned to Max, who pressed close against his leg. "She's part of it, isn't she, boy?" The dog whined softly, ears flat. John knew then with certainty. Daniel hadn't vanished by chance. He had been silenced, and the silence was guarded by more than just Hale. There was a network, a web hidden within the very department John had once served, and Lauren Mitchell might be tangled in it. As the fire crackled in the hearth, John opened Daniel's notebook carefully, prying apart damp pages. Most were illegible, ink smeared into blue-gray blurs, but one page near the back was still clear. Daniel's handwriting leapt out at him. "If anything happens to me, it starts with Hale." But he's not alone. Look at the deputy. Look at the money. Follow the trail. John's heart slammed. Hale, Mitchell, money. The words blurred as the firelight flickered, but their meaning was undeniable. Max barked sharply, breaking his focus. The dog stood at the window, hackles raised, staring into the dark woods beyond the cabin. John moved quickly, pulling the curtain aside. Through the fog, barely visible, a figure stood among the trees, watching. The night pressed heavy against the cabin, fog curling along the edges of the pines like smoke from an unseen fire. Inside, John Miller gripped the damp notebook in one hand and Daniel Brooks's revolver in the other. Max crouched near the door, every line of his muscular body rigid, amber eyes burning toward the dark where the figure had been watching. The German shepherd's growls filled the room, low and constant, vibrating through the wooden floorboards. Before John could move, headlights sliced through the fog. A patrol SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of the clearing, then another. The sound of doors slamming followed, boots crunching across snow. Max barked furiously, rushing to the window. John's gut sank. He knew that rhythm of approach, calculated, surrounding. The front door burst open with a crash, hinges shuddering. Sheriff Robert Hale stepped inside, tall and broad, his gray hair glinting under the lantern light. His face, hard as carved stone, betrayed nothing but cold intent. Behind him came two deputies. One was Deputy Carl Jenkins, a man in his early 40s with a barrel chest and thinning blonde hair. His cheeks were ruddy from cold, but his pale eyes had the restless flick of someone eager to prove himself. The other, Deputy Sam Ortiz, was younger, mid-30s, wiry with sharp features and dark stubble along his jaw. His brown skin contrasted with the pallor of fear in his eyes, as though he understood the weight of what he was part of, but lacked the courage to resist. "Evening, Miller," Hale said, his voice gravelly, calm. "I'll make this simple. Hand over the gun, the notebook, and whatever else you pulled from that tree." John kept his back to the kitchen counter, jaw tight. "You've hidden the truth for 15 years. You're not burying it again," Carl Jenkins smirked, resting his hand on his holster. "Man's out of his mind." "Should have stayed retired." Sam Ortiz shifted uneasily, his grip on his rifle uncertain. He avoided John's gaze, focusing instead on the floorboards, as if hoping the confrontation might pass him by. Max's barking exploded into the confined space. The dog lunged forward, teeth bared. Hale flinched back, giving John the second he needed. He sprinted into the kitchen, heart pounding, Max at his side. From the drawer by the stove, he yanked free his old Glock-oiled, loaded muscle memory, returning as though he'd never left the force. "Don't do this, John," Hale called, his voice echoing. "You'll only make it worse." But John wasn't listening. He crouched low, Max beside him, both of them breathing hard. His mind was already working angles, exits, the old rhythm of survival kicking in. Unbeknownst to Hale, another figure lingered outside the cabin. Michael Carter crouched low near the tree line, camera balanced in his hands. His leather jacket was soaked from fog, stubble sharp on his jaw, green eyes burning with adrenaline. He had followed Hale's convoy at a distance, camera rolling, hungry for answers. Now, through the cabin window, he captured everything. The sheriff's order to seize evidence, the deputies moving into position, the German shepherd defending his master. Carter's doubts about John were evaporating, replaced by something sharper: conviction. Inside, Jenkins moved first, storming toward the kitchen. Max launched at him, 80 pounds of muscle colliding with the deputy's chest. Jenkins crashed backward into a chair, arms flailing as Max's teeth sank into his sleeve. His curses filled the air, panic lacing his voice. John rose from cover, Glock aimed steady. "Stay down, Carl," John snapped. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Hale's cold eyes narrowed. "You just signed your death warrant, Miller." From outside came the click of Carter's camera. He whispered under his breath, "Got you." Lauren Mitchell entered through the back door, her auburn hair damp, her hazel eyes sharp as steel. She held her pistol low, but her presence shifted the tension instantly. She had once been almost kind, almost trustworthy. Now, standing beside Hale, she was another face in the masquerade. John's voice was hoarse. "It was you, too." Daniel knew. He wrote it. You and Hale, protecting the money, the drugs. That's why he disappeared. Mitchell's expression didn't falter, but the twitch of her fingers against her pistol betrayed her. Hale cut in, voice low and dangerous. "This ends here. Too many lives depend on it. You hand over that notebook, and we all walk away breathing. You don't, and no one walks out." John's mind flashed to Emily, his daughter whispering on her hospital bed about getting a dog. He looked down at Max, who stood growling between him and danger, loyal as ever. He wasn't going to surrender. Not this time. Michael Carter crept closer to the window, camera zooming in. He caught Hale's words clearly. Mitchell's silence, the deputy's unease. For weeks he had chased rumors of corruption. Tonight, he had evidence, and it was stronger than he'd dared hope. Inside, Sam Ortiz's voice cracked. "Sheriff, maybe we should—" "Quiet," Hale barked, his pale blue eyes snapping fire. The tension shattered as Jenkins, bleeding from Max's bite, scrambled up and lunged at the dog with a furious shout. Max twisted free, growling louder, and in that chaos John fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Splinters rained down. Silence followed, broken only by ragged breathing. "Put your weapons down," John shouted. "This is over." But it wasn't. Hale's gaze locked with Mitchell's, a silent exchange passing between them. Then Hale spoke, calm as ice. "You think one dog, one gun, and one old man are going to bring us down? You don't know how deep this goes." Outside, Carter's hands trembled as he adjusted the camera. He whispered, "This is it. This is the story." Suddenly Max froze, ears pricked, growl cut off. The German shepherd turned toward the back window, hackles bristling. John followed his gaze and saw another silhouette moving through the fog outside. A fourth man. Not Jenkins, not Ortiz, not Hale. Someone else entirely. The figure lifted a rifle, its barrel glinting in the moonlight, trained directly on the cabin. The crack of gunfire shattered the cabin's silence, echoing through the pines like thunder trapped in the valley. John Miller dropped low behind the overturned table, his Glock steady in his grip, but his pulse hammered like a war drum. The silhouette outside had become clear now, under the cold glow of moonlight. A man with a rifle, broad-shouldered and wrapped in a heavy hunting coat, his face obscured by a wool cap pulled low. The rifle's scope reflected a glint of silver as he adjusted aim. Max reacted first. The German Shepherd launched forward with a guttural bark, slamming against the doorframe, teeth bared, body quivering with raw defiance. Inside, Sheriff Hale cursed, ducking behind the counter while Deputy Carl Jenkins, still bleeding from his earlier scuffle with Max, shouted in panic. Sam Ortiz hovered uselessly near the wall, his hands trembling on his rifle, fear paralyzing him. Lauren Mitchell, her auburn hair clinging damp against her temple, tried to steady her pistol, eyes darting between John and the growing threat outside. Then the rifle cracked. A bullet sliced through the window, splintering the wooden frame. For an instant, time slowed, the sound, the motion, the hiss of death in the air. Max leapt. The German Shepherd hurled himself in front of John, intercepting the shot meant for his master. The impact was sickening. Max yelped, his powerful body twisting as blood darkened his thick coat. John's breath stopped, a howl rising in his throat that never made it out. He caught Max in his arms, sinking to his knees, the dog's weight crushing his chest in a way no burden ever had before. "No, no, no!" John's voice cracked, rough and ragged. He pressed his hands against the wound, hot blood seeping through his fingers. Max's amber eyes, once sharp and fierce, softened now, filled with something deeper than pain devotion. His tail thumped weakly against John's arm, a faint wag that spoke more than words. Mission complete. Gunfire erupted again, snapping John out of grief. Michael Carter, still crouched near the tree line, lifted his camera with shaking hands but quickly shoved it into his satchel. He grabbed his phone, fingers flying across the screen. He wasn't just recording anymore, he was sending a signal. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the call for help was going out. Inside the cabin, Hale barked orders. "Take him down! End this now before the whole damn state comes running!" But it was too late. Sirens began to wail in the distance, faint but growing louder, cutting through the night air. Blue and red lights flickered through the fog as patrol cars tore up the mountain road. State police. Reinforcements John hadn't dared hope for. Panic spread. Carl Jenkins cursed, trying to reload despite the blood dripping from his arm. Sam Ortiz lowered his rifle entirely, muttering, "I didn't sign up for this." Mitchell's composure cracked. Sweat beaded on her brow, her hazel eyes wide as though the weight of years of silence had suddenly crashed upon her. Sheriff Hale, however, remained eerily calm. He raised his revolver, his voice sharp. "This isn't over, Miller. You think one dog and one washed-up detective can unravel what we built? 15 years. 15 years of keeping this town afloat. You call it corruption. I call it survival." John rose slowly, Max still cradled against his chest, Glock steady in his hand. His grief burned hotter than rage, cold and precise. Survival doesn't bury a man in a tree. Survival doesn't murder friends. The cabin door crashed open. Officers in dark tactical gear stormed inside, rifles aimed, voices booming. "State police! Drop your weapons!" Chaos exploded. Jenkins fired wildly before being tackled. Ortiz dropped his rifle instantly, hands high. Mitchell froze, her pistol slipping from her grasp, clattering onto the floor. Hale turned, aiming at John in one final desperate act, but 3 red laser sights converged on his chest. The sheriff's eyes flickered, pride and fury mingling, before he finally dropped his revolver and raised his hands. The night fell into silence except for Max's labored breathing. John sank to the floor as paramedics rushed in behind the officers. They tried, but the wound was too deep, the damage too severe. Max's breaths grew shallow, His amber eyes locked on John's face until the last flicker of life faded from them. John pressed his forehead to the dog's still warm head, tears streaking down his weathered face. "Good boy," he whispered. "My hero." 2 weeks later, Cedar Springs gathered under falling snow. The town square was hushed, the air filled with the solemn sound of a bugle. At the center, covered by a cloth, stood a bronze statue, a German shepherd in a protective stance, head lifted, eyes forward. The plaque beneath read, "Max, Loyalty and Justice." The unveiling drew gasps, then silence. John stood apart from the crowd, his coat buttoned tight, snowflakes catching in his graying hair. His eyes glistened, but his jaw remained firm. He had lost his family once. Now he had lost the last gift from his daughter Emily. But Max's sacrifice had given Daniel Brooks justice, and the town its truth. Michael Carter approached. No camera this time. Only his notebook closed under his arm. His green eyes were softer than John had ever seen. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "And about him. I'll write this right. The world's going to know who Max was and who you are." John didn't respond at first. He simply looked at the statue, the snow drifting across its bronze surface, as though the winter itself honored the fallen dog. Finally, he murmured, "He was the best of us." Snow fell heavier, blanketing Cedar Springs in white. The town had been scarred by secrets for 15 years, but tonight it found something pure to hold on to. A dog's loyalty, a man's persistence, and a truth that could no longer be buried. And as John turned to leave, the snow crunching beneath his boots, he knew Max's spirit walked beside him still. Snow still fell over Cedar Springs, quiet and endless, as if heaven itself had laid a blanket of peace across the town. John Miller, standing before the bronze statue of Max, felt the cold bite his skin, yet warmth stir within his soul. He had seen darkness, betrayal, corruption, loss, but also the miracle of loyalty so pure that even death could not diminish it. Some would call Max's sacrifice instinct. Others would call it fate. But John knew better. He had felt the presence of something greater in that cabin. In the moment his faithful dog shielded him from a bullet meant to end his life. That kind of devotion, that kind of courage does not come from training alone. It comes from love, the kind that God places in all his creatures, reminding us that his miracles are not always thunder in the sky, but sometimes 4 paws and a beating heart. Everyday life will not always look like a gunfight in a cabin or the unraveling of a 15-year conspiracy. For most of us, the battles are quieter. Loneliness, fear, the temptation to give up when the world seems too heavy. And yet, the lesson is the same. Loyalty, love, and courage when guided by faith can move mountains, heal wounds, and bring truth into the light. So when you face the shadows in your own life, remember Max. Remember that loyalty is holy, that sacrifice can redeem, and that even in the coldest winter, God places miracles in our path. Sometimes in the shape of a faithful friend, sometimes in the hope that never dies. Friends, if this story touched your heart, share it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice may be the encouragement someone else needs. And if you believe in the power of loyalty, truth, and the miracles of God's love, subscribe to this channel so we can continue walking this journey together. May the Lord bless you. May He protect your home and your loved ones. And may He remind us all through stories like this that light always conquers the darkness.